Media PsyOps, a look into how social media has been weaponized for psychological warfare, with yours truly, BiaSciLab. Before I get started, here's a little bit about me. I'm 14 years old. I was the youngest speaker at HOPE, which stands for Hackers on Planet Earth. I am a 4-time speaker at DEF CON. I have also spoken internationally on election security at DEF Camp in Romania. I'm a maker and a hacker, and my election hacking from the Roots Asylum was highlighted at a congressional hearing on election security. Let's start off with a definition and then a little history. PsyOps is short for Psychological Warfare Operations, which are military operations usually aimed at influencing the enemy's state of mind through non-combative means. Techniques used by military, police, and political forces to influence the beliefs, emotions, and behavior of citizens. At the end of the day, it's all marketing. But instead of a product, they are selling you an ideal. Now, for some history. It was the year 329 BC, and Alexander the Great was conquering empires all around. He quickly took over large parts of Europe and the Middle East. As his armies kept taking over more and more land, the number of soldiers he had started to dwindle, causing Alex to wonder if he could keep all his newfound territory to himself. That's when Alexander the Great had a brilliant idea that would intimidate the enemy without needing to do much work at all. After conquering a new city, Alexander had his armies leave behind large pieces of armor that would fit a 7-foot-tall giant. When the enemy soldiers passed by, they would see massive chest plates, helmets, and boots. This surely intimidated the opponents, making them wonder if they could ever win a battle against Alexander the Great's army of giants. Around the same time, Genghis Khan also proved that the power of intimidation can go a long way. Before attacking a city, he would send messengers ahead to tell of the horrible, huge army that was coming to attack. As this presumably huge army came into view, all you could see is a massive dust storm coming your way. This wasn't caused by the number of soldiers in the army, but rather by rocks and heavy objects that the horses dragged along behind them, creating the illusion of a large army. His archers also shot arrows that would whistle in the air, further intimidating the enemy. Now, we will jump ahead to World War I and World War II. Back in 1914, the Germans were the first to send pamphlets to the enemy troops. After observing how well these tactics worked, the United States decided to jump in and make some propaganda of their own. These leaflets had topics such as how great the American troops were performing and how poorly the German troops were doing. Each nation also used PsyOps on their own citizens, sometimes leading them to believe that they were winning, even if that fact may not be true. The German military also used radio messages to state that the troops' wives were sleeping with other men while they were at war, so they should surrender and go home right away. Each nation used propaganda on their own citizens as well. They did this in order to get them to enlist in the military or to have them send money and supplies to help the troops. In Vietnam War, the U.S. military played a soundtrack called Ghost Tape Number 10 in the Vietnamese jungles at night to persuade the troops to surrender. U.S. forces hoped that the operation, codenamed Wandering Soul, would weaken the morale of the Viet Cong and prey on the fears of many Vietnamese. The Vietnamese culture includes beliefs and rituals that show respect for the dead. They believe if a person is not properly buried, they will wander the earth as a wandering soul. In the Gulf War, psychological tactics were very successful because they threatened consequences to those who did not abide by the coalition's rules. The American military also promised the Iraqi troops that no harm would come to them and they would be treated very well if they surrendered. These messages were delivered by airdropping pamphlets and by radio, as it was one of the few options the soldiers in the field had to distract themselves from the war. Many Iraqi troops surrendered holding that pamphlet. The Arabs also tried some PsyOps tactics on the U.S. forces, using a broadcaster by the name of Baghdad Betty. She told the soldiers that while they were out at war, their wives were at home sleeping with celebrities such as Mel Gibson, Tom Cruise, and Bart Simpson. This illustrates why you need to do research on your target audience before launching a campaign. You may be wondering, how can a tiny piece of paper or radio message make a soldier give up all he has already sacrificed? And how can warning messages intimidate entire armies? To answer these questions, let's take a deeper look into each of the prior examples. Before any PsyOps attack is used on an enemy, they're usually tired, hungry, stressed, and even depressed. This makes them even more susceptible to psychological manipulation. All propaganda typically ties into one or more of the 7 deadly sins: lust, gluttony, pride, sloth, wrath, greed, and envy. These 7 sins are the greatest desires known to humankind, so avoiding these feelings in such a horrible condition is virtually impossible. Additionally, they play on the strong human emotions of anger, fear, and hate. These emotions are also the easiest to stir up in an individual. With that in mind, let's look back on Alexander the Great and why he left behind those large pieces of armor. Remember, back then, the average height was much shorter than people today. Picture yourself as one of the soldiers, tracking down Alexander's army and finding giant pieces of armor that are twice the size of yours. That would definitely strike fear in your heart. Genghis Khan used the power of false numbers to his advantage as he stormed through cities and towns. This time, imagine yourself as a soldier in a city near a dusty plain that goes on as far as the eye can see. Suddenly, you hear the sounds of what you believe to be thousands of horse hooves in the distance. A huge cloud of dust appears as you watch your certain doom approaching, practically engulfing your seemingly tiny army by comparison. Again, fear was the emotion used here. In the times of World War I and World War II, you would see propaganda everywhere in your town, coming in forms such as posters, billboards, newspaper ads, and pamphlets. These posters included sayings such as, "I want you for the U.S. Army," which plays on pride. And this one, "He volunteered for the submarine service," which plays on lust. That covers things back home. But what about campaigns on the front lines? Because of the British blockade, getting food to Germany was virtually impossible, leaving the German troops with little rations. This gave the British the idea to send leaflets with pictures of their soldiers eating great food and smiling brightly. Many men went to sleep hungry that night while still holding that paper in hand. This is a perfect example of the use of gluttony in a PsyOps campaign. Now, picture yourself as a Vietnamese soldier walking through a dark, damp jungle in the middle of the night. You're tired, hungry, and just want to go back home to your family, who you haven't seen in weeks. When suddenly, you hear the sound of your fellow soldiers who have died, their souls wandering through the jungle forever, and the eerie sounds of Buddhist funeral music, screaming, crying, and the sounds of ghosts and spirits. Let's take a listen. At the time of the Gulf War, the U.S. sent pamphlets out to the Arabian soldiers, telling them that if they surrendered, they would treat them very well and no harm would come. These pamphlets were designed with the help of cooperative Iraqi prisoners of war. They advised to avoid using the color red and to feature soldiers with bowls of fruit, including bananas. Bananas are a delicacy to the Arabians. This played on the sins of greed and gluttony. Back then, they put propaganda wherever a large number of people would see it every day, like posters at a grocery store or an ad in a newspaper. These days, what is a widely used means of sharing opinions and information? That's right, social media. 82% of US citizens have a social media profile. Most likely, you have one too. Propaganda used to be a blunt tool and had to be tailored to appeal to a large general audience. With social media, ads can be targeted directly to a specific audience, making it more likely for someone to engage with the adversary's idea. There are many social media outlets, but we will be focusing on two of the big ones, Facebook and Twitter. Have you ever noticed that your social media ads seem to be targeting you? The other day you were looking up cupcake recipes, and suddenly your Facebook feed is recommending the baking topic and ads for mixers? That is because the algorithm is targeting you by tracking your likes, searches, who you follow, and who you interact with. You also have a digital fingerprint that ties all your devices, searches, apps, and pretty much everything you do online together. Facebook and Twitter know you better than you know yourself. The data from the algorithm helps them recommend topics, and more importantly, they can target advertising directly to you. This very accurate targeting is why social media has been the preferred delivery method for modern PsyOps. If you have already done some research in modern PsyOps, then this name will be no stranger to you, Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica was a political consulting firm that used large data sets to target and change the minds of voters. Though the parent company was located in Great Britain, they saw a big opportunity in the United States. Back in 2016, consultants working for Donald Trump's presidential campaign sought out Cambridge Analytica to help him and his campaign team win the 2016 presidential election. Trump's campaign spent over $44 million to run 5.9 million Facebook ads. At its peak, Cambridge Analytica was spending over $1 million a day on Facebook ads alone. Meanwhile, Hillary's campaign spent $28 million on only 66,000 ads. How are these ads so successful for Trump? It all starts with Facebook personality surveys. Jane Bambauer, professor of law at the University of Arizona, best describes how these surveys started out. In 2014, Alexander Kogan, a young professor at Cambridge University, made a personality quiz called This Is Your Digital Life that attempted to categorize the people who took it into a set of psychological profiles. Almost everyone who took the quiz agreed to let him access not only their public account information, all of it, including every like, but also the profiles of their friends. That's how a few 100,000 survey takers grew into a database of 87 million people. And even though only those few 100,000 took the personality quiz that mapped their psychometric profile, the researcher could use their results to build a statistical model that could then predict the psychometric profiles of the other 86 million Facebook users. The profiles were then provided to the researcher's company, Cambridge Analytica, which used them as assets to try to get political consulting clients like Donald Trump. In 2015, Facebook changed its policies to restrict how third-party companies collect information from Facebook users. By the time the change was implemented, Cambridge Analytica had already received the data. Cambridge Analytica used Facebook personality surveys to sort people into a few main categories. The survey, coupled with other Facebook data they were able to collect, created what is known as an Ocean score. Ocean, also known as the Big Five, stands for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Depending on your ocean score, they would determine if you are persuadable, who is someone whose political views could easily be changed. They would then target all their ads at the persuadables. They didn't worry about all the persuadables across the country. They only focused on the swing states: Florida, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. They knew if they flipped these few states, they would win the election. One example of an ad campaign that Cambridge Analytica created was the Crooked Hillary campaign. The logo included handcuffs as the O's in crooked. Their slogan was "Lock her up." Their art department would create many uncredited images and post them to Facebook. People who received these ads would not only like and share the ad, but would screenshot it and share it to other social media platforms, effectively free advertising. Cambridge Analytica created the spark, and social media became the flame, ending with the explosive 2016 election results. It is likely we will never again have free and fair elections, where candidates are chosen by their platform and ideas instead of lies and fake advertising. As you can see, these ads use childish bullying tactics, such as name-calling, as well as playing on wrath, fear, and pride. Cambridge was at its high point following the 2016 elections, when whistleblowers like Brittany Kaiser and Chris Wiley decided to take a stand against the company. After pleading guilty for taking people's personal data and refusing to give it back, the company declared bankruptcy and shut down for good. But this can't be the end of the story. What happened to all that data? I'm sure it wasn't simply deleted. After seeing how powerful that company was, it should come as no surprise that their business closing opened up the new era of disinformation for hire. Cambridge Analytica showed that there was big money to be made in disinformation. Since then, dozens of private firms have popped up in a space previously occupied solely by governments. Social media has offered the tools to sow disinformation at a scale to affect anything from a small local government election to spreading disinformation about COVID vaccines, or even upsetting a country's election. This can be seen today as Spanish-language anti-vaccine ads are pushed on Facebook. And going back to Cambridge Analytica, they were able to flip the elections in Trinidad and Tobago. They were hired by the majority, Indian United National Congress Party, to defeat the incumbent People's National Movement, which primarily attracts Afro-Trinbagonian voters. They researched both audiences and decided to target the young voters. They knew the young Indian UNC voters would do what their parents told them to do, and they would go out and vote for the UNC. So they focused their efforts on the Afro-Trinbagonian voters, creating a campaign called Do So to increase apathy towards voting and politics in general, encouraging them not to vote. Did this tactic work? Yes, it did. The United National Congress Party won the election. In case you are thinking this is recent news, this happened back in 2010, meaning that this sort of election manipulation has been going on for a long time. Besides creating campaigns and posting to social media, these private firms offer the ultimate power in a disinformation campaign: deniability. Governments and political figures can contract these disinformation companies to do their dirty work, making it very difficult to trace it back to the source. Content farms produce thousands of legitimate-looking accounts, complete with an untraceable, unique profile picture and a posting history as well. Legitimate user data can be purchased on the dark web to further assist in targeting this disinformation. The bonus is real people spread these conspiracies and lies by sharing and reposting on multiple platforms, giving a huge return on a relatively small investment. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. Donald Trump has been doing this even before he was out of office. He told his constituents that if he didn't win the election, it was rigged, conditioning his followers to rise up if he did not win the election. Once the election results were certified and Joe Biden was declared the winner, Trump started claiming the election was rigged, stirring up wrath in his followers, leading to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Trump still tells the lie that the election was rigged, despite the total lack of evidence. Yet, his followers believe it. The underlying message to his followers is, if you don't win something, it's because it was stolen from you. Cambridge Analytica wasn't the only one persuading voters in the US. Russian actors also used social media to cause havoc and divide the country. Why in the world would Russia do this? Unlike Cambridge Analytica, they are not out to gain money, but rather power. Soviet Premier Khrushchev said, "We do not have to invade the United States. We will destroy you from within." And that is exactly what Russia is doing, dividing the country so it destroys itself from within. I wonder why everyone tries to gain power by belittling others instead of bettering themselves. If the world was in friendly competition with each other, we could have made so much more progress as a society. The Russian actors created Facebook accounts and groups, as well as Twitter bots, all impersonating US citizens and organized groups. One example of this is South United. As you can see here, this ad was paid for in rubles. People follow these accounts and like and repost the content. One of the ad tools at Facebook allows you to send the ads to friends and people who also follow. And then you can pick from thousands of different keywords. The Russians also make fake news websites that appear to be real news sources, but are actually fake. When Bob goes on Facebook and reads an article on how Hillary is crooked, he's probably not going to check the source or compare it to other sites to see if this information is true. He will, however, like, comment, and repost this article so that all his friends can do the same, and so on and so forth. The younger audience may be thinking, yeah, of course it's fake, I can tell. But you have to understand that the older audience was brought up believing all news sources are fully fact-checked. They have applied this belief to all modern delivery platforms. After all, Facebook is where I connect with family and friends. Why would Facebook lie to me? Anyway, this news article must be real because the site it's on looks real. Turns out this newspaper's mailing address is in a shopping mall between the Orange Julius and the Piercing Pagoda. There's also a building in Washington, D.C., full of mailboxes. This gives any blogger living in his parents' basement the ability to list a legitimate sounding physical address on the bottom of his news site. An interesting fact is that the Russians target both sides, not just one, like Cambridge did. This way they can divide and conquer. In the US, Russian influence reached 126 million people through Facebook alone. They created fake Black Lives Matter memes, and when you clicked on them, you were taken to pages that invited you to a protest. At the same time, they were targeting adversary groups like Blue Lives Matter with similar fake pages, inviting them to a protest at the same location on the same day. The Russian government is organizing face-to-face protests in order to get us to fight with each other and divide the country. So far, we have talked about Facebook, but when you think about political discussions, your mind goes straight to Twitter. Just like Facebook, Twitter is used by Russians and other groups to sow disinformation to the American populace. They are using many of the same techniques that are used on Facebook. One big problem with Twitter is the low bar for entry. This allows groups to use tools that create many bot accounts very quickly. These accounts then go and tweet the same things. Once the bot gets caught and blocked, they simply create a new batch of accounts. The Twitter bots also retweet other bots' tweets, as is shown in this beautiful graphic by Daniel Gallagher. It's just like turtle bots all the way down. I hope some of you got that reference. Going back to the 7 sins and lust, these bot accounts frequently feature beautiful young women because the target audience is primarily male voters. Take this account for example. These photos were stolen off a Colombian Instagram influencer's account. Today, you got some history, some psychology, and a heavy dose of reality. But what can you do? Here are a few examples of how you can protect yourself against social media PsyOps. 1. Install an ad blocker. This way, you only get feed and not targeted information. One I highly recommend is the Pi-hole, which blocks ads on an entire network. 2. Don't take any online quizzes or surveys. I know it's tempting to find out what flavor of ice cream you are, but it's best not to give out personal information, as simple and minor as it may seem. 3. When reading an article, check the sources and who wrote it. Always compare it to other articles from trusted sites. And last but not least, 4. Always make sure to fact check everything you see and read. Never base your opinion on just one thing, and learn what both sides have to say before making an opinion. I hope everyone learned something today, and I will see you all in person soon. Peace out.